I'm not talking yet. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, I guess Jean is up next, right?
Yes, and I am so pleased to be able to introduce Nick Deford. I've been a fan of his work for years. I think he exemplifies the very best of what's happening here in Appalachia, in East Tennessee. We are a crafts and arts mecca and just getting better and better. Nick is the program director, in fact, of the Aramont School of Arts and Crafts, which is near Knoxville, where we are. It's internationally renowned. I'm sure some of you have been there. He also, I think it's important to note, he shows his work a lot, but especially he has been in museum shows, university shows, and public spaces of various kinds. So he's well known. And he's had some seriously good reviews, which I'm sure you can find on, either through him or on the internet. My take on Nick is that he has an interesting combination of humor, political and social savvy, and he also is a flawless craftsman, which is very important, and even in the arts. His work is distinctive. You always know it's Nick's, but he does come from a tradition in collage, and that is a tradition of not totally obscuring what you're working with, which would be found imagery of various kinds, but that he kind of obscures and embellishes existing imagery while retaining a bit of the original. So it's always one of a kind, and it's always intriguing. I would say a key word to talking about Nick's work would be labor intensive. He expends a lot of time and energy on his work. He manipulates the surfaces of the found imagery he finds. He uses stitchery, beading. He'll add whimsical found trinkets to obscure parts of an original. I love when he puts it over a face, which is really cool. You're going to see a delicious selection of his work today, and you can also find him online. We'll be providing his website address. So without further ado, here is Nick Deford.
Well, Jean, thank you so much for that introduction. That was really great. It's very humbling as well. I feel like you touched on so many things I was going to touch on, so it's perfect as well. So many of the words and phrases that I use. So I'm going to share my screen now. So just to make sure that people see what I see, does everybody see a picture of two kids standing in front of a Weird Al monster?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, then we're all in the right place. So again, thank you for everybody for coming today. I'm excited to share my work. One of the things that we talked about when we did this practice, sort of a practice session earlier in the week, was one of the reasons I love doing Zoom lectures, actually, somehow better than live lectures, because of the technology enables you all as part of the audience to be able to ask questions during the middle of my lecture. So I've actually got the chat screen pulled up over here to my right. I can see it. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type them into the chat. I'll see them and I'll answer them. And I think that's in a lot of ways a lot better than a traditional art lecture where you have to wait until the end. That way I can touch upon things that you think about right in the moment. So don't be shy, jump in there, ask a question. If there's something on the screen you want to know more about, or something that I mentioned that you didn't quite catch or want me to expound upon more, just let me know. So, all right. So this first image is the image I always show when I do my lectures. It's a picture of me and my sister standing in front of a swamp monster at the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans. And I feel like there's everything about this picture explains what you're about to hear me talk about for the next 30 to 45 minutes. The clothing that my sister and I are wearing are largely handmade clothes that my mom made us. And I think that things like this as a kid obviously influenced me about some of the topics that you're going to hear. So, All right. So this is my, I always start my lectures with this first piece. This is a piece called Lost that I did in 2006. I feel like that this is a really good cornerstone to talk about some of the themes and subject matters that I'm interested in. Let me go to a detail real fast. You can kind of see what this piece is, and then I'll zoom back out again. This is hand embroidery on top of a map of the world, and the embroidery is a maze. It is a real maze. People always ask. It doesn't have necessarily a definitive start point. You can start anywhere in the world that you want to, but it does connect to anywhere else in the world. So if you wanted to find your way from, say, Alaska to Australia, you could. And I made this piece because around that time, maybe a few years before that, maybe around 2004, I became really interested in maps. I'm sure, speaking to collage artists, I know there's probably a lot of affinity in the room for people who also like maps. Maps are beautiful, right? Especially vintage maps. Something about the colors, the information, the text, everything about maps I love. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my fascination with maps in a minute, but I wanted to specifically talk about this map. This particular map is called the Mercator projection. See, the thing about maps is this. Before I became a fibers artist, what I consider myself a fibers artist, I was a drafts person. I did a lot of drawing. And one of the things that you do when you draw is a lot of times observational drawing. You're taking something in the real world and you're trying to, I guess, decode it or decipher it or translate it to a flat surface. And there's a lot of tricks that are involved. Well, map makers have to do the same thing, because the world is not a flat object. The world is a sphere. And so every time a cartographer has to make a map, they need to do certain things in order to make the information fit. And they have to make choices based on what is the most important information that the map is going to be used for, because maps are utilitarian, they're used by people. So their Mercator projection, it was for naval navigation. So it was really important to be able to keep the shapes of the, I can use my pointer here, to keep the shapes of the land masses needed to be the same, but the size of the land masses didn't really matter. So the Mercator projection, what it does is, in order to keep those shapes the same, it elongates everything at the top and the bottom of the map, and everything in the sort of middle around the equator gets squished. Okay. So I learned this, of course, way later in my life, right? As a college student, when I was doing research in the maps. But see, this is the map that I looked at when I was a kid in school. This is the map that was like on the front of the classroom that showed me everything about the world. But, you know, a teacher never explained to me what I just explained to you all. A teacher never said, oh, by the way, did you know that this map is, not quite true? Because Greenland's not that big. Alaska, it is a big state, but it's not that big. Canada isn't that expansive. At the same time, landmass wise, Africa is one of the largest land masses in the world. And look at it. It looks like almost the same size as Greenland. Actually, it is the same size as Greenland in this map. And that's because they needed to keep those shapes right. So later in life, when I was thinking about that, when I close my eyes and I picture a map of the world, this is kind of what I picture. It's a little bit of a lie, well, that's the thing about map making. It's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth. It only gives you the truth that you need to know if you were, say, a sailor. And that's why I embroidered a maze on top, because no matter how much we do to investigate the world, no matter how much information that we have at our disposal to understand the universe, you're never going to understand it all. There's always going to be something that gets lost in translation. So I did a sister piece to it called Found. It's another embroidery on a map, but slightly different. But I think that they're saying the same thing. And I want to talk a little bit about why. Don't worry, I'm not going to pontificate this much about every image, but I think it's really important for these first images to kind of give an understanding about what my interests are. So I embroidered a Ouija board on top of this map of Iceland. So another detail. So you can see a little embroidery there. Now, this particular map is very different than the Mercator projection map that I just showed. This is a map that was done by a Dutch cartographer named Abraham Ortelius. I used to have this date like locked in my memory, but it's around the 15th or 14th century, I think. And it's, of course, a map of Iceland. Now, I've never been to Iceland before. It looks beautiful. Of course, see lots of pictures of it online. And I don't know if I'd want to go to Iceland if this was the map that I got from the AAA. I mean, this is a really unique looking map, right? It shows Iceland as sort of all these craggy areas. Well, first of all, if you're going to travel there, you have to get past all the monsters that surround the Iceland. And then if you manage to get to the land, there's all these crags and crevices. How are you ever going to hit landfall? There's floating debris out into the east. There's bears on ice floes. And maybe what's most interesting, I'll use my little pointer here again. Here's Mount Hecla. And you can see it's spewing fire, and actually on the map in I think Latin, it says that it is literally a portal to hell. So when Abraham Ortelius made this map and he took it back to mainland Europe, people I'm sure were like terrified. Wow, Iceland! Well, what an intense place! What a place that only the brave would tread. But this, like the last map, it is telling the truth. In fact, we can chuckle at this map and say, oh, this map is an exaggeration, but is it that much of an exaggeration? For instance, the monster at the very top of the map, this guy up here labeled number A, is this horrible sea beast that they recorded and they wrote stuff about because it was this horrible fish that had this horn sticking out of its face, and they called it a narwhal, and those are real fish. Or whales, I guess in this case. So that's, if you've never seen a particular animal before, isn't it a monster until you know it? Isn't it a monster that you like or fear until you understand it better? Isn't it that like landscapes? I mean, if you had never seen a volcano before, never even seen a photograph, because they didn't have photographs in, how else would you describe a volcano if not a portal to hell? I mean, we think about these as taking poetic license, but I don't know, maybe this is in a lot of ways as accurate as the last one. Oh, somebody says they can't see images. Can people see a map of Iceland right now? Raise your hand if you can see a map of Iceland.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I can
People
see
see
it.
it. So Mark, I'm not sure why you can't see the images. You might want to jump out and jump back in maybe.
Perhaps if you change your view up in the upper right corner from whatever you have to something else, it might show up. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'll keep going. So yeah, and to be honest, just like the map before was supposed to be to help people navigate the oceans, this map had a purpose too. It wasn't necessarily to navigate to Iceland. It was to try to communicate to people what it was like. And I think it does a pretty good job. So why did I embroider a Ouija board on top of it? Because in a lot of ways, a Ouija board does the same thing. It's an attempt by humans to understand a place that we cannot go to until you're there. I think that I'm fascinated by Ouija boards because they're a tool or an implement that is so much to me about desire, yearning, and both fear and curiosity of the unknown. And to me, that device in this map does the same thing. All right. So with those two pieces, I feel like those two pieces really sort of explain a lot of the themes that I'm going to talk about throughout. And as I mentioned, I'm really interested in maps. I think that comes a lot of the time from my background as a drafts person, and also now as somebody who's a fiber artist. When I moved into a more traditional craft discipline like fibers, one of the things that often describes or a characteristic of traditional craft is that it's utilitarian, right? You can use it. I have a really lovely mug here by Jessica Brandel. You know that it's a utilitarian craft object because I'm using it. I'm using it to drink my tea. Well, maps are interesting because they are utilitarian drawings. They are drawings that you use for a purpose. And what I like about maps is how everybody can make one. Like if we were all together in the same place and I'm new to the town and I need to get across town to get to the airport or somewhere else to a gallery, you would draw me a map. And the great thing about maps is you can put as much detail into a map as you want, every single turn, every little thing, but a map needs at least two things to function, to be utilitarian. It needs where you are now and where you're going, right? That's the only two things that a map needs in order to be used to navigate, where you are now and where you intend to go. So if you really wanted to remove the function of a map, and I think Jean talked about this, one of the things I love to do is obscure. I like to sort of take away the function of something, cover up information. If I wanted to take away the function of a map, all I needed to do was take away all information except for one place. So this is a series of pieces that I did called points of interest. Somebody asked how I transferred the drawing from embroidery to a map. Let me get back to I'm going to get back to my embroidery pieces, Penny, here in a minute, and then I'll cover that question then. So these points of interest series, I took maps and I obscured everything except for one specific place, and I selected for my place a place of notoriety for its mysteriousness. So this is the Bermuda Triangle. You can see here, Bermuda Triangle, of course, 3 points in the Bermuda. And then I obscured everything else in the picture, in the map around it by the little Dymo label maker tape. And I punched out everything that had been recorded missing in the Bermuda Triangle. So you can see the details there. There's a lot of stuff that's gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. Another piece I did in this series, if you zoom in here, you can see this Roswell, New Mexico, home of the site of the notorious 1947 UFO crash. I use map stickers to obscure everything else, and they radiate out numerically. So it starts with 1 around the area and it gets all the way out to, I don't know, 200 something on the edge. I love stickers. For me, there's something about stickers that's really amazing. Again, speaking to collage artists, I know you all are going to sympathize. I think about stickers as ready-made marks. That's what I think stickers are. They're like, you know, in ready-made, in sort of, oh man, everything just fell out of my mind. The ready-made sculptures of the early 20th century, I think about stickers as just ready-made mark making. And so I like to do that. And as a fiber artist, I tend to think about them as fibers too. I'm doing something repetitive that creates a surface or a texture, which is sort of a definitive characteristic of all fiber arts. So speaking of Roswell, I'm going to move along a little bit to some more embroidery pieces. And now I'm going to get to Penny's question with this one. This is a series. This is a piece called Invasion, where I embroidered on these posters that I actually bought in Roswell, New Mexico. So these UFO posters. So what I wanted to do with this piece, I love maps. When doing all this map work, I started really thinking about geography and how we internalize, like the psychology of geology, or geography, I think would be a good way to put it. How maps help us navigate spaces we're unfamiliar with, how uncomfortable we get when we're lost, and the opposite of that, like being home, you know, the security that you feel when you're home because you know every nook and cranny of your home, right? Like you know where everything's at. That's why home is so comfortable. But as humans, we're very complex people where we love to be home until we're tired of being home. Then we want to go somewhere. We want excitement. We want to get lost a little bit. So we go out into the world and we vacation and we travel and we explore, and then we get homesick. And then when we come back home, and then we're at home until we feel travel lost. And then we go out and travel again. It's just rubber banding back and forth. And so I was thinking about times when that gets broken. You know, speaking about the comfort of home for anybody who's had the unfortunate instances of their life of having a home invasion or somebody being having your home broken into, it completely shatters that psychology of home. You know, everything about that safety of home feels completely, the illusion just goes away. And so I was thinking about that with extraterrestrials. You know, we don't know anything. We think we know most of the places on Earth, but the space remains a mystery. So when space breaks into our boundary of Earth, it is disconcerting. So what I like about this series too is it makes little poems. The little top phrase is "God bless this home," and the bottom phrase "Wish you were here." Two phrases that get used a lot in embroidery, especially embroidery around the house. And then I like how they make these little poems. So to answer Penny's first question, how do you transfer the drawing from embroidery to the map? So I do use stencils. I design all the text and the font on a computer program, print it out, cut it out so it's a stencil, trace it on, then embroider it. So I can get those specific fonts. the way that I want them and where I want them on the page. And you'll see some more of that in a minute. Esther asks, how do you protect the stickers before you place a frame on it? I don't. They're stickers. In fact, the Roswell ones, some of them are already falling off into the frame. I'm fine with that. I'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, over the course of this presentation, but I'm a firm believer that our materials should do what materials do, right? If a material breaks down over time, then a material breaks down over time. It's hubris to think that we can keep something good forever, and sometimes art doesn't need to last forever. So eventually my stickers will quit sticking. They will shed. All the little Roswell stickers will shed off like leaves from a tree in autumn, and I'm fine with that because I think that's kind of beautiful too. That's a great question, Janet. How do I use? Do you have to use a backing to stabilize paper you are embroidering? Yes. And I'm going to wait till I get to another one of my pieces here in a minute and talk more about that. So with all this text-based work, I'm honoring two things. I'm honoring both my love of poetry. I was actually, was really, when I was an undergrad, I was conflicted about if I wanted to be a writer or to be a visual artist. And I eventually chose a visual artist. But in every single piece that you see today, even if it's subtle, you will see some text. I think I love working with text. I love thinking about poetry. I love minimalist poetry. If I could have a one-word poem, I would. I like boiling it down to its essence. But I'm also referencing traditional embroidery samplers. So many things that we see around the house, little phrases. Usually they're biblical quotes, but they could be quotes about sort of homilies about life and love. I love looking at old embroidery samplers. I wish I could collect more of them. So I wanted to do my own sampler at some point. I like to challenge myself, and you'll see that more as we go on. I like to challenge. I stitch into paper, which is Janet's question. I have to do a little bit of work with that. But I like to always challenge myself to take that one step further. So I have done some pieces that are like book arts or like altered books. Well, I'll stitch into a book. This is a little sort of pamphlet book that I picked up probably at a thrift store, used bookstore. It's a witchcraft book. It's like a book of spells for sort of pagans and Wiccans. And I was thinking a lot about embroidery as a practice and how, listen, if I could sit here and talk about the relationship between fiber arts and the supernatural and witchcraft, we'd be here another hour. But so I'm going to really quickly just say it's a really rich history and I love it. But I wanted to sort of honor the sort of idea that these new stitches that I were learning and doing felt a lot like incantations. So this is a little sampler that I made of different stitches, and I sort of thought about them as spells or incantations when I was making them. So Janet asked, do I use a backing? Yeah, so I use iron-on interfacing. So here's a good example. This is the flat sheet of paper that I beat it onto. Most of my papers that I find, again, I feel like I'm amongst my own people here talking about collage, talking to collage artists. Most of the things that you'll see me show today are found paper. I rarely use like a blank white page. I go to thrift store. I get most of my art materials from thrift stores, antique stores, etc. So this is some beading I did on this sort of found animal print. So the back of it, if we were to flip it around, it has iron-on interfacing, which you can buy from a fabric store. It's just a mesh of fibers that gives the paper a little extra, stability, so that there doesn't happen any tears between my the holes that I stitch into. For something like a book where I might want people to see both sides of it, I use, and this is perfect, right? I use what is called fusible bonding web. It's a generic term, but you might know it better as one of the more brand name versions, which is Stitch Witchery. So Stitch Witchery is fusible bonding web. What fusible bonding web is that heat activated adhesive that's on the iron-on interfacing, but it's nothing but that. So you can glue two things together. I like that because one of the reasons I got into fiber arts is I don't like sticky stuff. I don't like my hands to be sticky. So any way that I can use quote unquote dry adhesive or stitching to combine two things together, I do. So I made this little series. I found this little package of prints that had both animals. I had sort of a combination of different North American animals. And so I took the predators of that piece and I sort of obscured them, making them even more mysterious. So I did this bear and I did this badger. That badger is covered with sequins. All of the stuff that I do is hand sewn. I don't use any machine stitching, so it's all hand sewn on paper. When I did these predators, I realized I needed to do an opposite series called prey. So in the prey series, I did all the prey animals, and then I embroidered a prayer on top of them. And this is a really good point to go back to Penny's. Like, I really needed to design this on the computer before I started stitching it, because I need to make sure that it fit on there. It fits exactly where I want it to. So a little bit of designing work before I stitch it. Here's another one. I think this is my favorite of the series. These wonderful rabbit print that shows its changing coat. And the prayer says, "Even as I clothe my body with wool, cover my soul with the shadow of your wing," which is extremely ominous when thinking about poor rabbits. So I did a little series. I thought this would be most appropriate, especially to talk to collage artists about. I did a very small series of works called phylacteries about 10 years ago, where I was just doing almost like sketches, like really taking all these extra little paper pieces and stitching them together into these little visual poems. I sort of think of them about, really exploring stitch as a way to combine things together, really just utilizing all the ephemeral things, bits of paper that I collected. I love keeping things as they are. This old book of needles, having a needle stay in there, really love that. So this is just a small series. You'll see this again, I think, as I get to the second half here of my presentation. You'll see that I really do go back and forth between some pieces, as Jean mentioned, that take a long time, like maybe this piece, and pieces that go really quickly, like these very small collages. So I want to go back to this piece just for a quick second, because I feel like that there's something that maybe people have picked up on with all the pieces that I've shown so far that have text on them, like the invasion piece, the spells piece, the prayer pieces. All of those pieces, the font is specifically this Ouija board font. So even though I'm not making work specifically about Ouija boards, I'm always carrying that with me whenever I use text in my pieces, because it's this particular font, which you can find online, called Captain Howdy. It's the name of the font. In reference to Captain Howdy, if people want a little bit of trivia, was the name that Reagan gave to the demon that she talked to in The Exorcist, the movie, by a Ouija board, which is why they call it Captain Howdy. Working with Ouija boards, sometimes when I give it's a really long history. First of all, Ouija boards are a sort of a brand name owned by Hasbro at this point, of course, the toy and game company. But the generic term for a Ouija board is a talking board. And there are talking boards throughout all kinds of history. They really became famous sort of at the turn of the century in America and England, sort of late 1800s, early 1900s, when spiritualism was very, very popular. You would have a medium come over to do seances, and the medium would come over and do these things. And I think that at some point, talking boards as something that you could sell to people became, who needs a medium? Why hire a medium? We can just buy a talking board and do the seance ourselves. But it's interesting to me because I've given a lot of the lectures in the past where I talked about Ouija boards, and sometimes the response from some people who see my work and hear me talk is pretty strong. They have very strong feelings about Ouija boards. And usually it falls into two camps. One camp is that, they're very, very dangerous occult items, other than that they're nonsense, and that they don't work, and they're silly kids stuff. And I tend to think of them somewhere in between, but I definitely don't necessarily think that they're dangerous, because as an artist, I think any object can have power. That's why I make art. That's why we all make art, because I think we believe that objects have power. But I don't think that they're necessarily dangerous beyond that, because let's face it, like I mentioned, like they sell them as toys. Parker, now they're owned by Hasbro, and the Parker brothers, I think, used to own them. You can buy them. In fact, talking about game boards before this, I collect Ouija boards. I have like a stack like this tall in my closet right behind me. And so far, have never seen a ghost yet. So, but Ouija boards, to me, like I mentioned at the beginning, they represent something that's really fundamentally important about humanity, which is a desire to know the unknown. And that is really what I think my work is about. This sort of fear of the unknown, but curiosity for it, this desire for the unknown. And the irony is, once you know something, once you call that animal a narwhal, it's no longer unknown. It's not a monster, it's just an animal. So as I mentioned, I think so much of that history is wrapped up in mediums and the power that somebody has versus the power that an object has. So I made this little series of, okay, like I mentioned before, I like to challenge myself. I like to see how far I can push. I was stitching in a paper for so long. I wondered if I could stitch into more rigid paper. So I was like, can I embroider into a game board? And you can embroider into anything you can stick a needle through. Sometimes you need a little bit of extra help to stick that needle through. So like with these game boards, I would have to pre-drill the holes with a Dremel tool before I stitch. But I did this series where I sort of stitched or embellished with sequins and beads the path, the line drawing that a planchette would make as it travels across the board to spell out a message. So in this case, this one says "right behind you," which I think is a super creepy, little creepy message. So it's a little game. I did a whole series of them. People can stand there and try to figure out what this Ouija board is saying to them. If you can follow the message all the way around. Well, once I did that series, I was like, I couldn't stop. I was like, I want to embroider into more game boards. So I found a game board of a board game of the Bermuda Triangle. And boy, that sounds like it would be so fun and mysterious, but it was really a boring game about shipping logistics. You had to get like lumber and sugar and bananas and oil to different ports, all without having to go down in the Sargasso Sea underneath this mysterious cloud. So I embellish the triangle itself to give it some more of that power, to give it some substance, something more to it. Working with these game boards, a lot of the times I'm just responding to the image beneath. I'm either obscuring, as Jean mentioned at the beginning, or I'm highlighting, or I'm embellishing. As an artist, I don't see myself again as somebody who creates meaning. I see myself as somebody who reassembles meaning. I feel like I am much more a prankster than necessarily a truth teller. I want to be able to just rearrange the information there so that new information can be gleaned. So this one is just, I cover the entire map of the world. It's really hard to photograph sequins. This is a lot more like bright and shiny than it is as a photograph. This is a risk board that I embellished with these hand sewn little sequins on it. I started to get a little bit into imagery and some other things. This is, of course, a Monopoly board where all around the edges where the property is at and all the property is color coded, I reflected the color underneath with the sequins I was using, and then sequined these huge dice at the top. Every once in a while, I like to get into making these images. I like the juxtaposition of an image with something else. This is sort of a rip-off Monopoly game called Easy Money that I found, and I just embroidered a Leviathan eating somebody on it, or did that with the sequins. It seemed to be really fitting to me. I don't have any specifics about this piece other than I was probably thinking about my student loan debt. And then every once in a while, I try to figure out what would happen if I obscured everything. So this is a game board where every single inch is covered, but I wanted it to sort of reflect what it was underneath. So if you can kind of sort of like squint your eyes and sort of like just stare at it. It's a Scrabble board. And so what you see, those little blocks of color that come through the chaos are the like double word squares and double letter squares and etc. underneath. Finally, we mentioned at the beginning, like once you work with board games enough, people just start giving you board games. And so this was given to me. This board game was given to me by an artist in Fran. Maybe some of you all know her work. If you don't, you should. She's a fiber artist, Gina Klein, really amazing artist. I'll type it into the chat over here. She's like, oh, I've got this Laverne and Shirley. Got this Laverne and Shirley game board. Can you do something with it? And I'm like, I don't know. And so a lot of times I just have stuff that sticks around. And then one day I'm like, all right, I'm going to tackle this. But it was perfect enough. I love the shape of the game board. I love the shape of the squares. all I did was just embellish it. I just used referencing the colors underneath to get this really great color combination. I like the challenges that game boards provide. Again, it slows me down. That's really what Jean mentioned at the beginning. It will take me 3 months to embroider one of these game boards because it's just so slow, the process. So at the same time, I also have another series. I'm still making the game boards, but I have another series that I work alongside it that's a little bit faster. And to talk about that series, which will end my presentation here, it deserves a little bit of backstory too. As I mentioned, I'm really interested in sort of early 20th century spiritualism, and particularly how that was almost like a popular parlor event. You know, now you get together and you might play Trivial Pursuit or have karaoke or go to bar trivia. Back in the early 1900s, you'd have a party and you'd have a medium come over and do a seance. That's what you did. And part of that boom in spiritualism was also around the same time that photography became a practice. So it didn't take long before photographers were like, there's money to be had here. And they would come to photograph the seance and be able to capture spirits, or mediums the same way. Mediums would they're getting paid by the patrons to come and participate. They want to put on a show. So there's all these sort of like moments of you know, it feels so judgmental for me to call them hoaxes, because again, I feel like what they provide is so important, but these extravagant extra things that would happen that would be proof of these events. So spirit photography became very popular at the time, being able to capture faces, blobs, whatever they are, ectoplasm in this case, coming out of the medium, and then the face in the cloud being some loved ones, or this sort of an after image. Fairy photography was very popular in England. So over here, there's actually a really good book. I always, whenever I give my lecture, I pitch this. Again, my brain just shut down. Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, was also an avid spiritualist. He really believed in a lot of the things that was going along with the beliefs in spiritualism at the time, which is strange to think about, considering that he created one of the most pragmatic characters in all of fiction. But he wrote a couple of books about it that are really wonderful. One of them is called Coming of the Fairies, where he defended fairy photography in Britain. I mean, we can look at these now, like the Iceland thing, and kind of chuckle at them, and we can easily see how they're hoaxes now. I mean, being able to double expose an image is so easy that even we can do it, right? It's not difficult to do a double exposure, but at the time, things like this convince people that fairies and spirits are real. So these wonderful, wonderful spirit photographs are something that I wanted to try to emulate on my own. What if I made my own spirit photographs now? And if at the time it was all about embellishing with photographic processes, or having actual, a lot of the times mediums and seances would make ectoplasm by like basically hiding gauze in their mouth, and they would like kind of pull gauze out of their mouth as ectoplasm. Well, I can do that. I mean, what I do is I embellish surfaces. So what if I created my own ectoplasm? What if I created my own ghost auras and things on photographs? So I did this series to wrap up my presentation, where I sort of it's happened in the past couple, maybe the last 5 years. I actually, for a long time, didn't photograph on photographs. Didn't embroider on photographs, but I actually taught a class. I was at the last moment taught a workshop about how to embroider on photographs, and in my own practice, I enjoyed doing it, and people really responded to it. You know, here I was doing all this text-based stuff and map-based stuff, and people liked it. But when you alter a figure, when you start to change a human figure, there's almost an immediate emotional and psychological response from your viewer. So I keep doing these. And like I mentioned, they're a really good practice for me, where embellishing these photographs might take me a day or two versus the game boards, which take me months. So I like to keep them going at the same time. I was just thinking about figures and strange symbols or shrouds or auras or other things that might not have been picked up in the original photograph, but I can add to them. I can make them more meaningful. I can add the spirit or the mystery or the unknown to it, even if it's 80, 90 years later, maybe longer. This is, I think, the one that went out on the email. I like this one because it does have that, it really becomes more three-dimensional with that costume jewelry being added to their faces. Stitching together different pieces of other found papers. I love thinking about places out of time. Like if we think about what ghost could be, ghost could just be seeing something that's happening in a different time where time overlaps. So in these sort of stitch collages, I like to think about time overlapping, little black holes where different places are leaking through. You know, so many of these, again, like probably so many of you all, I go to thrift stores. Yes. So Melinda, yes, they are. I go to thrift stores, you know, or antique stores, and especially, you know, sometimes antique stores will kind of mark these kind of things up because I know that people like them. But if you can go to like a thrift store, you could sometimes find a shoebox of photographs for, you know, $2 or something. And this was a case where this particular family, I got in this like shoebox. And what's lovely about this is exactly the same. This is a diptych, two pictures. This is exactly the same picture. It's a duplicate. So this girl is just the same picture on the left and right, but look how different the left side of her face is versus the right side of her face. So all I did was obscure one side of her, and her demeanor and her emotion is completely different in those two photographs, even though it's the same photograph. Same here, the same girl, but clearly it was the same girl in this family, but one was this sort of like hand colored photo, Olin Mills photograph, and the other one was black and white. I love stitching it together where you get this composite of this person, even though they're two different photos. Adding these two baby photos so that they kind of line up, it becomes this mysterious otherly person, otherly individual spirit. I don't know what it is. And I still do a lot of stitching, you know. The stitching on photographs is really important. So some of the embellishment is sequins and beads and things like that. These are French knots. I don't know if anybody here is an embroidery artist. French knots are a wonderful way to embellish photographs. Some beads. There's something always, I mean, I think people also have a pretty strong reaction when there's you know, children in the photos versus adults. In this case, it's very ominous, this child being held by this now shrouded figure, which becomes very mysterious. I love this little one just putting this shroud on this woman. Oh, they're sewn. Yeah, no, everything I've shown today, aside from the sticker pieces I did at the beginning with the maps, everything is sewing. So even when I do paper collage, in a manner of speaking, like the phylactery pieces, those are all sewn together. I don't use any adhesives. You know, again, sometimes I'll use the iron-on interfacing and some other stuff to support pieces. So a question, are I sewing directly into the actual photo? Yeah, I am. Yeah. Sometimes photographs seem really delicate, and sometimes I get game boards and maps that they're so great, I don't want to do anything to them. I'm afraid to mess them up, and I don't. I keep them. They're just souvenir. They're these things. But I think sometimes, even if you find something that you think is too precious to put marks on, that can be a trap. Nothing's ever too precious. This is one where I use a tea-stained embroidery floss to embroider this little shroud on this kid. Sometimes I sew bead by bead to answer Catherine's question. Most of the time I'm stringing a couple together. I can't string too many of them together because will affect the stability of the stitch. The beads will wave around. So it's only a few beads at a time. And then maybe something like this, you can kind of see maybe they're strands of 3 or 4 beads in a string, because you can kind of see like up here, like that's probably a stitch, and that's probably a stitch. Oh, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, Nancy, and what you're talking about, I think the mystery is something, I think this is the end of my presentation, so I'll kind of linger here for a second if people have questions. But the mystery is what I want. You know, all you have to do is cover cover up somebody's face, and then they become, well, I mean, it's like the opposite of the narwhal, right? Like a narwhal is a mystery if you've never seen one before. And then once you label it and you categorize it and you put it in a zoo, then it's not a mystery anymore. It's just an animal. And people can be the same way, but the opposite. Everybody recognizes people, but think about even just the past year during the pandemic, wearing masks, how you can't read people's faces as easily. And you don't know if somebody's smiling at you, or it's hard. And that level of mystery, I don't know, to me is very compelling. I'm the type of person, I'm going to keep wearing a mask all the time after the pandemic, because it's something where I can so always be mysterious and compelling. So I think that covering things up can do that. I'm going to end the show and just go back to my well, before I end it completely, do I need to go back, answer any questions about specific pieces? All right, ending my show. I'm going to quit my screen sharing so we can all just be people talking to one another again. And then I'll keep answering questions. So, and then at this point, if people want to, I don't know, Barbara, if we want to do it this way or just keep doing using the chat, but if people want to jump in and ask a question out loud, they can. But Catherine's question is, do I poke holes in the paper prior to beading? Not like a bunch, like I don't pre-poke all the holes in the whole paper, but yeah, when I'm going along, I know where I'm going to stitch, because stitching on paper is very unforgiving. Fabric forgives because you're not creating a hole when you stitch in the fabric, you're actually just pushing threads apart. Sort of like pushing, the holes are already there. But when you poke a hole in a piece of paper, that's it. You can't go back. You can't undo that hole. So I want to be really careful with the holes that I poke. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, Janet, great question. Can you do the iron-on thing with photos? All right, so I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Caveat for anybody who wants to use iron-on interfacing, especially if you're using found photographs, maps, paper products, anything that you pick up at the thrift store or the antique store, you need, before you even get to ironing on anything to it, get your iron. And of course, when you use an iron, don't put any water in it. You don't want to make your paper wet. Get a little corner and then test the heat, because if you're working with a vintage piece of paper, you don't know what that paper is made out of. There is one map, it just seemed like a normal map, but when I started ironing onto it, it melted, because it must have been a paper made with some vinyl or some plastic into it, and it just started to melt. Same with old photographs. Sometimes those old photographs are made from who knows what. So yes, you can do the iron-on thing with the photos, but you want to test it first, especially if you are going to take that risk and embroider into like the only last photograph of your great grandmother, then you want to test that before you just start sticking an iron to it. Although, to be honest, Janet, like I've been doing embroidery on paper for so long, I have the tactile sense to know when my holes are too close. I don't necessarily always need that extra stability. If the cardstock or if the thickness of the paper is pretty substantial, like I would say cardstock or heavier, then a lot of the times I don't do the iron-on interfacing, because I don't need that extra. That the interfacing is just there to keep rips from happening between the holes. So if I'm confident that the rip's not going to happen because the paper's pretty sturdy, then I just skip that step. Well, if people have questions, happy to answer more, but I have hit my 45-minute limit. So I'm going to at least take this opportunity to say thank you. And also to say that, oh, I'll type it into the chat here. There's one more question, but You can always visit my website. Although I feel like these days, if you just Google my name, as G mentioned at the beginning, you can probably find even more interesting stuff out there on the web besides my website, interviews, articles, things like that, and see some more of my work. Can I show the needle sizes? So typically when you get embroidery needles, you know, they come in a variety of sizes. When I'm working with paper, I want to use the smallest size I can possibly use because I don't want that hole to be very big, because again, the holes stay forever. When I'm working with the beads or the sequins though, because I'm using seed beads, I have to use beading needles. So they're very, very slim. The eyes of the needles don't widen. So that's so the seed beads can go over the needle. Final question maybe from Lauren. What type of thread do you use for my mat pieces? All the thread that you saw today is embroidery floss. It's my go-to. Well, when I'm beading, I use just normal thread, but because it needs to be very thin. But when I'm doing the embroidery pieces, it's embroidery floss, which you can find in the embroidery aisle of any craft store. They come in all the different colors. DMC is the floss that I typically get. I bought my embroidery floss in a nice, container, which is just one of like, I don't know, 6 embroidery floss containers that I have. So they have every color that I need, which is always nice. So. All right. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of the meeting today.
Oh, thank you, Nick. That was very enlightening and fun, and so much information that we have learned, I think, and it was just delightful. And does anyone have any other further questions for Nick before we change the subject? So again, thank you, Nick. I'm so happy we recorded it so we can see and hear some of this again, because there was a lot of interesting facts and information and viewpoints that are new to many of us. So let me just end at the moment then with, are there any questions or comments regarding CAA or for any of our board members? Does anyone have anything they want to ask, say, or do? No, I think very quiet out there. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending, and wishing everyone a very, very happy, safe, wonderful Thanksgiving. And Barbara, do you have anything further to add or say?
Only that I will keep the Zoom open for the next 10 or 15 minutes if people want to talk individually or just chat, but I'm going to stop the recording now.
One more thing, Barbara.
Yes.
One more thing. Please think about joining our board. We have a wonderful group of people who are all fun, smart, and dedicated, and we would appreciate and invite you to join us on the board. So think about it, please. Contact any one of us. And then Barbara, back to you.
Okay, I'm stopping the recording now, and again, the Zoom will be open for the next 10 or 15 minutes just for informal chat. Pretend we're at the center and we have a chance to talk.